Hello, and welcome back to
Game Review!
My name is Caleb Denby, and today we're going to be going over a game from Wang Hao against Anish Giri. Wang Hao, of course, is going to be in the Candidates this year. Candidates tournament coming up in March here. Might have already started by the time this video airs, and so I wanted to take a look at some of his best games against the world's top players who he will be facing later in March. So this was a game he had against Anish Giri that started with d4, d6, then I've been reading my YouTube comments. They say all I go over is d4 games. So I tricked you. This one, actually an e4 game. It was an e4 game all along. You just never realized it. Knight f6 was played, knight c3, and then black continues with e5. And we have a Philidor type position, a Pierce type of position, whatever you want to call it. White continues with knight f3. Simple development, developing the knights, supporting his center. Black continues with knight bd7. White comes out with bishop c4. And now, black actually goes in for a little bit of a sideline here. Generally, black plays bishop e7, white gets castled, and black gets castled. And you have a normal sort of e4, e5, Philidor type of game. In this case, though, black takes on d4 instead of playing bishop e7. And now you have probably been told time and time again that in the opening, you're not supposed to get your queen out too early because it's likely going to get harassed by black's pieces and you're going to lose time and your opponent is going to use that time to get developed. In this case, though, it actually makes a lot of sense to take this pawn back with the queen. And the reason for this is both this bishop and this knight are in poor position to actually threaten this queen. Now you can imagine if this knight were back on b8, it would come out to c6 and hit white's queen and develop with tempo. But unfortunately for black, he's already committed this knight to the d7 square where it cannot attack this queen. And so the result of that is the queen on d4 is simply a strong active piece that isn't really vulnerable to this type of harassment. Black continues development with bishop e7. And now, white actually has a few options here. You can still just play a normal chess game, just get castled, develop your bishop, anything like that. But what Wang Hao chooses to do is very, very interesting. And that move is bishop takes f7, a sacrifice early on in the opening, taking advantage of the fact that his queen has already been activated. He's already developed these pieces, and he has easy development with this bishop ready to attack the king side as well. Black plays the only move black can really play with king takes f7. And now knight g5 check comes on the board. And this check is actually pretty annoying to deal with. If you come back to f8, obviously you're going to get hit with a fork. If you come back to g8, the problem is going to be this active queen. It comes to the c4 square, and there's no good way to deal with this check. You can block momentarily, but I'll simply take, and these threats aren't going away. Of course, you don't really want to come to g6. You're just a little bit too vulnerable out in front of your own pawns like that. And that leaves one move, king e8. And now you might be thinking to yourself, well, we've seen, what's it called? Why can't I think of it? What's it called? Danny, what's it called when you checkmate a king with a knight? Suffocation? Smothered mate. All right, we'll cut that out. Now, you've seen smothered mates before happen to a king, but in this case, it's pretty interesting. It actually happens to black's queen here. But this is still the line that we see occur in the game. And now black actually does have a way to save the queen. He does so with this move, c5. He responds to the threat to his own queen by attacking white's queen and giving his own queen squares to escape. Of course, white isn't interested in a queen trade, so he simply retreats this queen back to d1. And this forces black now to spend a move, saving his own queen. And now white is able to break through with this move, knight takes g7 check. Of course, the king has to move again. It's best in this case not to go to d8, where it could get a little stuck and would be harassed by more checks. Instead, it's better to come out to f7, gain some more time on this knight. So the knight has to move again, in this case back to f5. This bishop drops back to f8. supporting some of these squares, preventing things like knight h6 check, and stepping out of the threat of capture as well. And white takes this opportunity to simply castle. And now we've reached a point in the game where black has kind of dealt with the immediate sacrifices and the immediate threats from white. You know, he's left with this king on f7, but for the moment he is solidly up a piece, and now is the point where he has to make decisions. And honestly, this is the difficult part of this opening here. For these top players, they can usually calculate well enough to deal with all of the forcing variations. So black survived the forcing variations, but it's actually at this moment where he makes a critical mistake. Now, this has been analyzed in more depth since this game that happened back in 2013, and these days, players have kind of realized that rook g8 is the way to go for black here. You can put some pressure on white's king side and activate this rook, simultaneously guarding some squares in front of the black king. This is what players have been playing these days. Now, over the board, it's going to be very difficult to figure out that rook g8 is the best move, because black simply has too many options here. You can play a move like queen c6, or you can play a move like d5, which is what Anish Giri played in the game. Unfortunately for him, this one doesn't work out so well. Knight takes d5 from Wang Hao. Giri recaptures this knight with knight takes d5, and now simply queen takes d5 check is hitting this king. Now, actually here, Giri makes another critical mistake. Already, white might have some slight pressure, some slight pull in this position, but queen e6 would keep the game going. White could drop back all the way to d1, aiming at some squares on this queen side, such as h5, but after rook g8, black might still be doing okay. Instead, though, in the game, we saw Anish Giri bring this king back to e8, and this allows white to bring his final attacking minor piece into the game with bishop g5, guarding all of the squares around the black king. Anish tried queen g6 to put some pressure on this piece, but Wang Hao simply ignores this threat because it's not a threat with rook a d1. Of course, you can't capture this bishop due to knight d6 check, winning the queen. Giri now tried rook g8, making this a real threat, but Wang Hao simply plays f4, defending this bishop and putting more pieces in powerful attacking position here. You see, white just dominates the center of the board, dominates with his attacking pieces, and the black pieces are stuck on the first two ranks, not doing much at all. a5 was what Anish Giri tried, but of course this doesn't get the job done. Perhaps he wanted to do some lateral defense with this rook, but it's too little too late. Wang Hao plays e5, a nice move, taking advantage of this d6 square even more. Giri tried taking this knight. Of course, this leaves the defense of the rook behind, so Wang Hao simply captures. And now rook a6 does come on the board, but it's much too little, much too late. Rook e1 from Wang Hao, rook g6, and now the final move of the game, Wang Hao ignores the threat to his queen and simply plays e6. And this is where Anish Giri decided to resign. Of course, if rook takes g8, you would simply see e takes d7 check, king f7, and then white gets a brand new queen for his troubles. So a very nice game from Wang Hao, a nice attacking game, a sacrificial game to take out Anish Giri, whom he will be facing later on in March in the Candidates Tournament. So I wish Wang Hao the best of luck. He's definitely one of the underdogs in this upcoming Candidates Tournament, but I think a Wang Hao-Magnus Carlsen World Championship match would be one for the ages. So best of luck to Wang Hao in this Candidates Tournament coming up, and thank you so much for joining me on this week's episode of Game Review. My name is Caleb Denby, and I'll see you next time.